Labor does want to legislate its election promise of reducing Australia's emissions by 43% by 2030, but they could walk away from that deal if they don't find broader support. They say they won't compromise on what they took to the election. Joining me live is independent MP for Warringah, Zali Steggall. Thanks very much for your time. Labor's main conversation is obviously with the Greens, but you're a pretty interested onlooker. The main compromise seemed to be it's going to be a floor, not a ceiling. Labor said that's fine, that's what we intended anyway, but they're not really going much further. They say what they've taken to the electorate is what they're doing.
Well, look, we've met with, I've got to be very complimentary. Chris Bowen has been very consultative. I've met with him several times now to discuss the climate bill. Obviously, I had put a lot of work in the previous parliament presenting a climate change bill, and I'd like to see as many elements from that replicated in this bill. We've already gotten movement from the government where they've included a much more precise reference to science and more clarity around the reporting and what the minister's sort of reporting to Parliament will be.
So just talking us through that, that would mean what, annual reports on how the target's going and more information on that than would otherwise be provided? Is that what you're saying?
So from the original drafting, there has been amendments made as a result of consultation to include language around floor, not a ceiling, in terms of ambition, but also around the kind of necessary detail of reporting for the minister to ensure that we have visibility how we're tracking towards our climate targets and ambition. And more clarity of reporting and advice giving from the climate change authorities. So these are good. It's not everything, and I am working on further amendments and hope to have further discussions with Chris Bowen about this.
I mean, Labor says on the core element, the 43%, what's locked in, and also the push from the Greens on no new coal and gas. It's not for shifting. It's taken something to the voters and it won't go beyond its core values on this, albeit it's willing to look at other changes. Is that fair enough?
It is, but remembering that whilst Labor took 43% to the election and was elected on that, I was elected on pushing for 60% emissions reduction by 2030. Yeah. The Greens have their mandate. So
you can push for that, and that's why they argue that, but ultimately they have the majority in the House. And that's why they're not going to adopt something they never said they'd take or go beyond a target, because they're still the majority party. That matters, right?
Sure, but it's very disingenuous to say you're taking climate change seriously but not listening to the science. We have to be clear, 43% is a political target, it is not a scientific target. It does not keep us as close to 1.5 degree as possible. So whilst I can support them on 43 being a minimum start, the reality is we're locking in net zero by 2050, and so for that to be achieved, we will need to increase our ambition.
It's a bit more up for debate, though, what we need to get to by 2030. We've got, 2051 thing, we actually have more of a carbon budget, if you like, but this is a worldwide thing of which we're about 1.5%. So,
well, I'll take you up on that. I don't agree with that argument. We're the third largest exporter of fossil fuels. We are a major contributor to global carbon budgets.
Yeah, but most of those don't actually count in our emissions.
Yes, but again, weather events do not stop at boundaries. They don't respect borders, right? At the end of the day, this is a global problem.
I know that, but we're talking about the carbon accounting rules, and those rules don't apply to everything we export. If it's within the mining emissions are ours, the exports aren't. That's just how things go.
But again, that's a ridiculous argument when the reality is the purpose of the Paris Agreement is keeping global warming in check. We need to keep ourselves as close to 1.5 degrees as possible to ensure we have as stable an environment to continue having thriving economies and communities and our way of life. So for that to happen, we need to think of that as the ultimate goal and work backwards on what needs to be done to achieve that. If not, it's all for nothing.
What you're talking about there, though, Labor's not considering. Stopping exports or saying, no, we better not export that coal because it will be burnt somewhere else and contribute overall to climate change.
Well, I would argue they're having, to borrow a phrase from the last parliament, a little bit of a bet each way. They want climate credentials by legislating this, and due credit, they are doing it. This is an important step. But they also want to keep sort of their relationship with electorates where there's coal mining, and rather than offer a clear transition, they are still staying attached to fossil fuels.
They seem to be playing nice at the moment with you. They don't have to, do they? This is the tricky situation. You've got a core ambition of yours to increase action on climate change. Your vote, not to be too indelicate about it, doesn't have to count, does it, in the House of Reps? They've got a majority.
Well, sure, but the last government had a majority as well, and you saw that on several occasions the crossbench was able to actually take control of the House, and the government lost the vote on several issues. So
Labor, the difference being no one from Labor can cross the floor.
Again, you're assuming
They're
everyone
expelled from the
turns
party.
up on every day, that you have a very large crossbench that now represents a very big vote. But more importantly, we represent a third of Australian voters. And we can't forget that, and the government can't forget that. And whilst, look, at the moment, ministers are being incredibly respectful in their dealings. I've had great meetings with Tony Burke, and we've got great changes to standing orders. Chris Bowen has been very consultative on this, and I think they recognise this new era of politics. I think there are still a few elements that are very from the old school style of politics, more adversarial, but on a number of issues, ministers are being very good.
What do you mean a third of Australian voters? Who's we?
Well, if you look at the breakdown of the election, the major parties got a third each of the vote, and crossbench or small parties and Greens.
Right, but not by
independents.
MPs.
No.
Representatives.
But you have to say there was
You're saying a third of voters
switch.
turned away from the major parties?
Yes.
Manly Sea Eagles in that situation. Should players be entitled to sit out the game if they don't want to wear the pride jumper?
Well, I think it will come down to the contractual terms of their player contract. But I do feel personally that their position is fairly hypocritical, that they take a stance on inclusion, yet have no issue with gambling or alcohol on their jerseys. I feel that this is not about religion. I think this is about sort of a macho masculinity that I think needs to be addressed within rugby league.
Zali Steggall, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you.